Hello, Flyers fans, and welcome to Flyers Files, an exclusive podcast on 97.3 ESPN.com. I'm Kevin Durso, Flyers insider for 97.3 ESPN, and I'm joined by Haley Taylor Simon, who is part of you've heard her on the air with Mike Gill on occasion, and she's going to co-host this podcast with me. We'll be on once a week talking Flyers hockey, and what better place to start, I guess, than with the start of a new season. This is the beginning, and kind of it's fresh. It's a dawning of a new season. It's a clean slate. We like to talk about that a lot when a season starts. Probably couldn't come at a better time if you're following some of the other teams in the city. You know, one season comes to an end and another season begins. So the Flyers get ready to get underway. And Haley, I think the first place we got to start is with the two rookies on the team. You know, there's two rookies that one expected from about July on and another kind of unexpected. So we'll touch on both of them. First, Matvei Michkov, the newcomer that everybody's been waiting for, the high talent draft pick that this team has. You've been at camp with me. You've seen some of what he can do. You've covered a few of the games in the preseason to see what he can do. What are your expectations for him? What kind of impact can he have?
So it's difficult to say what kind of expectations I have of him because he is still so young and he hasn't played in the NHL yet. However, his stick and puck handling skills are unbelievable. Even during drills at camp, even when he's goofing around, you can really see the skills that he displays. And even in the games too, I mean, he has gained this confidence about him as the preseason has gone on. So I'm not going to put a number of goals. Now I'm hoping it's more than 20. I know the guy likes to shoot his puck. However, I will say that he is going to be an impactful player on the power play, especially. So fans can look forward to seeing an improved Flyers power play.
Yeah, and see, I don't like doing that either. I'm not big on the numbers expectations because it's just, I don't think he needs it, to be honest. He doesn't need pressure like that. So I look less at the numbers and I say, what can he do for other guys on the team? So the power play is one area that I agree with you on. You've got to see what he can do with other guys who are on that unit. And then whatever line mates he plays with, I'm curious to see who he actually starts the season with. They've tried different combinations with him. I'm not sure if we're going to see him with the line combination that he started camp with or the line combination that he somewhat finished camp with, whether it's with Morgan Frost and Owen Tippett or Sean Couturier and Travis Konechny. I think the hint was John Tortorella said there's some chemistry brewing between Michkov and Konechny.
Yep.
Maybe that's the answer. I would try it just to give it a start. They've gone away from whatever I thought they were going to, or what I thought the best line combination was. I always kind of had him with Frost and Tyson Forster, but
Yep.
maybe there's other thoughts in mind here, and I'd be willing to see anything that they think could work. What about you?
I really like him with Konechny and Couturier. I think that's the strongest line for Michkov. However, though, we do need to talk about the fact that there is chemistry between him and Morgan Frost, and even Morgan Frost has said it. So, again, it's one of those things that maybe they'll try out Konechny and Couturier tomorrow. Doesn't work. Maybe they put him with Frost. I think that at the end of the day, you want to have Michkov exceed. You want him to exceed expectations. You want him to be able to really thrive on the ice. And in order to do so, you need to put him in a line that's going to really highlight his skills. So Morgan Frost, he said he wants to play more of a defensive game this season. Well, that really works out with Michkov because Michkov likes to score. However, you put him with Konechny, and I know that Konechny's with Couturier. I'm just throwing this out there. Konechny's going to want to score too. So do you put him with a player that's going to be, goal hungry? Or do you put him with a player that's going to help set up the plays? And that's the biggest question.
Yeah, and Frost is that creative guy, so that's why I always kind of had them together in my head anyway. But you're right about the Konechny aspect too, and I think back to they've talked about how Konechny can sometimes be a tough player to read when you're out there, and maybe you need the high skill guy who can read him just to be out there with him. So who knows where it ends up? I that's why I said I want to see him with everybody just about, because who knows? Like any combination might work here. I think he's going to get to play with a lot of different guys anyway by virtue of the power play, and then you see maybe if that translates to 5-on-5 and beyond. Honestly, a lot of the talk about being better at 4-on-4 or 3-on-3 or certainly power play situations, they need his help everywhere. And I want to add in with Michkov the idea that, everybody kind of assumed, oh yeah, it's a high talent guy, so he's got a lot of skill, he's going to set up plays, so the points are going to be the whole narrative of his game. And I think that it's really important that we talk about the other aspects of his game that maybe weren't as expected. His ability to protect the puck and win puck battles, or his ability to be seen on the back check and maybe make a play in the defensive zone to help out a little bit. I think that was unexpected, and seeing him have that level, kind of level of maturity to his game, because of the fact that he was advertised so much as this skill guy who's going to put up points. If he can be an all-around player and still put up the points, I think it's really something the Flyers have been missing for a long time.
And they have been, and I think even just seeing him in those preseason games and his positioning on the ice, he's totally capable of setting up plays, right? And he's okay doing so. So I think that when you have a player that's, obviously going to develop even more when it comes to setting up plays, winning those faceoffs, I think that you're going to have an all-around skilled player, which is something that the Philadelphia Flyers haven't had in a long time, as you said. And this is what's going to help the team going forward. Sure, we can talk about, Michkov is going to bring the Flyers a cup. I see it all over social media. However, I think that this is a developmental year for Matvei Michkov playing in the NHL. Who knows, Kevin? He might honestly be the solution that the Flyers needed. But as Tortorella says, this is not the Mish show. And I think that the organization is going to do their best to kind of protect him in a sense. And I wouldn't be surprised if he gets healthy scratch at some point this season. I wouldn't be surprised if the same way Tortorella treats all of his other players, he treats Matvei Michkov.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't either to a degree. I think I would be, because of how much I've seen from him so far, that it seems like he's attentive to those details that John Tortorella likes. So I don't know that he's going to get on his bad side per se to be scratched. But there's going to come a time where he's going to hit a wall offensively, and you need to continue to do the little things. And if he's not, then that's where that kind of comes into play. So we have to be prepared for that
Yeah.
moment. I think the interesting thing for him, and what makes this such an important year for him, and I agree with you, developmental year sounds better than worrying about him being a savior. Danny Briere said he hates that word. I don't, John Tortorella is certainly not going to go there. And but if he gives you a reason to draw fan interest, there's something to watch every single night to see, does he make a play? Does he do something that you didn't expect to see? That's enough for me in the beginning. In his rookie year at 19, that's more than enough for me, and set himself up for those moments later where, yes, you're relying on him to be the centerpiece of a team that is in contention, a team that is expected to do things in the playoffs. Maybe that's not this year, but down the line, it's going to be. So the more you can see out of him, and I think it's important that you get a reason for people to be invested in this team the way that they became invested last year. I'll say, like, I don't think anybody went in with expectations of this is what the season's going to play out like. Now I think there's a little bit more expectations, and you add Mishkov in, and it's like, okay, now there's a reason to tune in every night to see what this kid can do. So I think it helps. And I think that also, if you're looking for reasons to have people tune in, it doesn't hurt to have another player that people aren't as familiar with. So I want to shift over to Jet Lashenko, who he's the unexpected guy on the roster. He's the guy who came in, and it's just, he's super young. He's probably going to find out soon enough that he's not ready for the NHL level. And he just kept passing every test that the team threw at him. He played in 4 preseason games. He had way more action than I think people would have expected. And as things progressed, he was in situations that you couldn't deny are being set up for guys being prepared for an NHL season, not to go back to their junior team. So he ends up making the team. And I think, I don't want to jump right into his impact for the whole season, because we don't know yet if this is for the full season. So I guess the bigger question for him, and the one that I have in front of me right now, is, can he stick beyond the 9-game tryout? That's what he's going to probably get to start with. Maybe it doesn't even amount to 9 games if they don't feel he's ready, but he's going to get a chance to potentially be here for 9 games. And then what? So can he stick? What do you think?
I mean, that's a good question. I think that's the question on everyone's mind right now. I personally, and this is not anything negative towards Jet whatsoever, I do not think that he's going to surpass the 9 games. I think that it gives him an opportunity to play NHL games. And I think that's the most important takeaway from all of this, is that Jet Luchanka will be playing NHL minutes, which is very important. However, at the end of the day, you have a really tough road trip against some really good teams. It's not like you're playing the easiest teams in the league. You're playing some difficult teams out there. So you're kind of putting him into a shark infested water in a sense. And I think that Jet has a lot of skill. I mean, he just turned 18, Kevin. I spoke to his parents actually at the draft. And they were so surprised that he even got drafted as early as he did. So I think that, no one was expecting this. And I kind of expected it. And I know you were there when Tortorella said, I'm going to defend him to Danny and Keith if he exceeded his expectations, which obviously happened. However, is it fair to him and his growth if you keep him on the Philadelphia Flyers throughout the whole season and he gets limited minutes on ice? I think it's more beneficial. Hey, you play 9 games. That's awesome. We're going to send you back. And he's going to have that time to truly develop his game. He's going to know exactly what he needs to work on. And now he has more motivation to come back more prepared. But to put that in an 18-year-old, it is possible, right? We do see 18-year-olds in this league, but it's usually the Connor Bedards. It's usually the guys that are drafted first or second draft picks. It's not the guys that were drafted 13th overall. So the fact that only him and Celebrini are the only 2 players from this previous draft class, getting ready to take the ice for opening night, it says something. But 9 games, I think that's all he's going to have. Maybe even 7. I don't see him staying the full 9.
Okay. That's definitely interesting, and I'm glad you went there with he's one of 2 from this past draft class
Yep.
to make it, and because that was one of the first things that came into my mind is that's how unexpected it feels like it was. I mean, I go back to draft night when it felt like this was a lot of people were saying they were exactly that, surprised he got taken that high, that it feels like more of an upside play, things like that. That's what I think is exciting about this is that no matter what happens with this, I think there's a lot more anticipation for him as a future NHLer long term because he's made it this far. So already it was that unexpected. But beyond that, I agree. And I don't think that I think the area where we're going to find the struggle is in the offensive production because I think he needs to maintain somewhat some offensive production to stick around. It was great to see him come out in his first preseason game and play a bunch of players that were minor league level and roughly that possibly even the same level as him, junior level guys, and have an impact game. He had 2 assists in that first preseason game, and that definitely earns you another look. But then he went pointless for the rest of the preseason, and it's not all about that. I did see him do some of the little things well, and he has a maturity about his game, and that quality, that maturity, is why I'm not worried about him going back after this tryout if it happens that way. As much as it's possible that he goes back and has an immediate slump because it's not the NHL and you're a little down about the fact that you didn't stick at the NHL for the whole year. I understand that may happen, but if he's as mature as they say he is, this isn't going to ruin him or anything like that. If he's that mature, if he wasn't, then I'd worry. But if they're saying he's that mature and he carries himself a certain way, he should be fine. I just worry about the offensive production being enough for him to stay on the team because eventually I think you're going to get to a point where doing all the little things is great. And if the maturity sticks around and his awareness sticks around and that works, great. But if he's not scoring a few goals or chipping in with some assists, he's not going to be able to stay here probably. And that's where I worry about that once he started playing more legitimate talent, it started to fade a little bit. And this is what you're going to get on a nightly basis. I'm glad that you brought up the schedule in the beginning because I think of, and I'm not trying to bypass the first couple of games, but I think about the game against Edmonton on their schedule where it's like, you're going to end up out there possibly against Connor McDavid. What kind of matchup does that look like for an 18-year-old fresh out of the draft that isn't necessarily on that level? This isn't putting Bedard out there against him or Celebrini out there against him. This is Lachenko, who is the youngest player. He's going to be, when he debuts, he's the youngest player in franchise history. So tells you what kind of responsibility he's going to have. And I understand why he's here. I get that the lack of center depth is a big part of this, but you have to think long term with this, and maybe it answers the question for you. Maybe his play in the first handful of games answers the question for you. I kind of hope it does. Maybe I hope it does the other way, honestly. Like if he does stick for the whole year, I hope he answers the question for them because he's that good. Maybe that happens. I'm not expecting it to, but then again, I wasn't expecting him to be on the team either. So maybe he's just got a chip on his shoulder the whole way. And I like, to me, and I want to pitch it back to you on this, like, these 2 players are like the most intriguing thing that this team has going for them right now because of how much they've run it back. Like it's very much the same team from last year otherwise. So when you run it back mostly, but can inject these two young guys in. That was a question I asked a couple of the guys. I asked Joel Farabee about this and Scott Lawton about this. And I kind of pitched it more toward the power play and like, hey, just having a couple of guys like this. And I'll be honest, I probably asked it more with Mishkov in mind than Lachenko at that point. I don't really even see, I know they're going to probably start Lachenko on the power play or on for at least a little bit, but I see him more as a guy that's going to get more penalty kill time in the beginning because I think they've done that since day one. Power play, I think they're doing some experimentation to see if it works. So I just like the injection of the further injection of youth and the injection of potentially some new energy into that locker room that they talk about how good it is. Does adding two rookies to that make it that much better? Because you have somebody now that, as young as they are, you can talk about these guys as long-term pieces. I think that matters a lot.
So on draft night, I asked Jet, I said, who on the Flyers do you most like model your game around or who inspires you the most? And he said, Travis Konechny. And I wanted to bring that up because I think that when you have a player on night of the draft, right, he just got drafted and the first player that comes to his mind, Travis Konechny, that gives me excitement. Now, I know I spoke to Igor Zamola and I know how excited he is about having Michkov over and Ivan Fedotov. I know that they're excited about that. So you have then this Russian group. You have a lot of good, and I hate the word vibes, but you have a lot of good vibes in the locker room, which is fine. However, what I do think though is that it's going to allow a player like Konechny, and I say Konechny a lot because he is obviously one of the leaders on the team, but I feel like he is going to take Jet under his wing. And I feel like I've seen that at practice time to time. And I feel like, too, with Michkov, I mean, I know that him and Oliver Bonk were very close. However, I do see Morgan Frost kind of looking out for him. And I see different players taking interest in these players. Now, a player that is so underrated, and it bothers me so much, Kevin, because this one player does add a lot to this team. It's Tyson Forster. He is undoubtedly the most underrated player in the Philadelphia Flyers heading into the season. And again, Forster's young. I think we forgot how young he is, 21, 22. He is a young player still. So I think when you have this core group of younger players, it adds new faces, but it adds excitement into the locker room because you're going to get that speed. And that's something that players lose as they get older is the speed. And Jet Luchenko, he is fast on the ice. It's ironic that they named him Jet just due to the fact of how he is when he's on the ice. But I do think that this is going to bring some new energy. Yes, the Flyers are running it back, but you mentioned the power play, and Tortorella talked about Rocky and said, we've been having meetings about the power play. And I think that just goes to show that this team knows what they need to work on, and they have the talent that can produce good hockey. We saw that last season with almost going to the playoffs. So I think there is a lot of motivation, but you can't deny that adding Michkov, especially, it's going to help this team. It's not going to hurt the team.
Yeah, and so Forrester's a great guy to bring up here because he was supposed to be the rookie injection last year, and I just went back and checked really quick because I know it took him a long time to kind of to settle into the lineup. He wasn't a sure thing at the beginning of the season to be playing every night, and then it took him 16 games to get his first goal of the season. He ended up finishing the year with 20, but took him 16 just to get on the board to begin with. And I kind of wonder in my mind for some, and I like kind of like I just talked about with Lachenko, but with Mishkov as well. What's the one thing Mishkov has done that really helps the excitement level? He plays his first home game at Wells Fargo Center, sets up one goal, scores an empty netter, gets really excited about that, comes out the next game, scores two more goals. There's an immediate deliverable from him that says, okay, this is what I'm here to do. I can score goals. Here, Flyers fans, right in front of your eyes are three of them right out of the gate on home ice. They don't get to start at home, obviously, but if Mishkov goes out and scores in his NHL debut, that's going to generate excitement. If Jet Lachenko maybe doesn't score on the road trip, let's say, but plays the home opener and gets his first goal there, or can get a couple of points on the 4 games on the road trip, that can generate a little bit of excitement. And I wonder if for Forster that kind of applies as well, even though he's not a new guy. Starting off like that, starting off with a goal early on, maybe being the guy, I think about guys who have scored the first goal of the season in the past, in, I believe the year that Oscar Lindblom had kind of a big breakout year, he scored the first goal of the season. And it's like, okay, that's excitement. Now there's a guy who maybe I wasn't thinking about him as a top contributor at the beginning of the year, but he scores the first goal and then he scores more as the early part of the season goes on. And I can get really excited about that. I think that's what Forster kind of needs. There's a lot of guys, and Forster's maybe one of the guys I think that kind of gets lost in the shuffle with some of this because he's not one of these guys at this stage of his career that's kind of at a point of critical mass where it's like, well, what are you going to become? That's reserved for Morgan Frost more. That's reserved more for Joel Farabee at this point. These guys that have been somewhat brought up in whether or not they're going to get traded. I don't
Yep.
see that as much with Forster. So maybe Forster being a guy who jumps in right away, contributes a goal in the early going, or gets a couple of points on the board on the road trip to start the season off strong. He can turn himself into one of those players that maybe one of those players we lump in with guys like Konechny and Owen Tippett. Those are two guys I think that come to mind that turned themselves into irreplaceable players in this rebuild. And maybe that's what Forster can become. But I want to go back to something that you said, or another player you brought up in part of the locker room groupings, if you will, because it's a topic we have to get to because I think it comes up every year when we talk about the Flyers. You brought up Ivan Fedotov, and the goaltending is a topic that comes up every year, whether we like it or not. And it doesn't help when the head coach says that the goaltending situation scares the crap out of him. So let's talk about that with Sam Ersson and Ivan Fedotov on the active roster right now. Alexei Kolosov is now in North America. He's going to be playing for the Phantoms, at least for the time being. So that creates a unique dynamic. And I wrote about it the other day on 97.3 ESPN.com about how I think this is the most fascinating position the Flyers have. If center is one of the weaknesses, and that's why Jet Lachenko makes the team, goaltending to me is fascinating because you got two guys that you theoretically, I think a lot of people feel like they know a little bit about Sam Ersson's game, but you're still finding things out about him as a starter now. And then you're definitely finding things out about Ivan Fedotov. You're finding things out about Alexei Kolosov. And then you've got these two prospects that are not going to be part of the Flyers this year, but that are making noise in their own right. So, like, kind of this situation that they're in, it's a unique one because it's not necessarily the most solidified position, but feels like they've got a lot of solutions.
I mean, they have solutions. Now, will I say I feel confident with Ersson and net this season? Somewhat, only because he does seem to have more of a swagger about him heading into training camp and preseason. Ivan Fedotov. He makes me nervous. I'm not gonna lie. He's a big body and he does, have that ability to play well. However, I know when he came in last season, it was the end of the season and it just wasn't looking good. Um, Personally, I think that having Ersson be your starting goalie from the beginning of the season, smart move. However, it does make me question this whole rebuild, retool, whatever you want to call it, because the Flyers knew after the situation with Carter Hart last season that they had a goalie issue, that they didn't have their number one guy, and they put that on Sam Ersson. And Tortorella, Briere, everyone knows that they worked the crap out of Ersson and net. And it makes me question, it really does, that the Flyers didn't go try to get an elite goalie during the offseason. It makes me question. I know money is a situation. They have no money to really spend. However, you could always make trades. You could have always shifted around players to open up that space. So this is my theory, and I could be totally wrong, or I could be totally right. The Flyers still need to get high draft picks. That's still a legit thing. Are they heading into the season, maybe not John Tortorella necessarily, but management? Are they heading into the season knowing that the goalie issue is still real, but they would rather, and I'm not saying purposely lose games, I don't want that to get twisted, but they would rather not fix that now because they have things like the draft next year that they want to get high draft picks in. Now, I could be totally wrong on that. I just found that very interesting that the one position where you could really go after some strong goalies. I mean, for instance, look at Boston with Swayman and how they just signed him. Like, they could have done something to get a more solidified goalie, but I'm going to trust Ersson and I want him to succeed. It's not that I don't. It's just, does he have what it takes to be your number one guy?
I think that, and that's where the intrigue with some of these prospects come from too, is that if you really like Carson Bjarnason or you really like Yegor Zavragin, who is the other 19-year-old that they've got. Like Zavragin to me is potentially on a path that mirrors Igor Shesterkin. Now, Shesterkin's possibly in line to become the highest paid goalie in the league once that contract situation resolves itself. But and that's certainly ambitious to say, but if his numbers end up lining up over the next several years and you're several years away from seeing him, maybe that's where the long-term solution lies. But so I don't necessarily worry about that they didn't go out and get somebody. But I do think that if you're going to be talking, if this team is going to be talking playoffs in another 6 months, it's going to be the goaltending that's one of the key factors to it. And to me in particular, see, I definitely like what I see from Sam Ersson because I know has the potential to pull out one of those big games. I mean, even after being worked the way he was able to shut out the New Jersey Devils to keep the Flyers season alive into game 82 and give them a chance at possibly making the playoffs in the final game. So I know he's got it in him to have a big game. They can't work him the same way. And pretty clear that the lack of trust in backup options at the end of the year was the big problem. So if Fedotov can emerge as that guy, maybe Kolosov is that guy. We'll have to wait and see as the season plays out. But that to me is one of the key positions that dictates whether or not they make it or they don't. And I tend to agree with you. They could use more high-end picks, top 10 picks if they could get them. I wonder if they'll end up there kind of regardless. Like I kind of had them regressing anyway to a degree. Not necessarily far. They were lined up to pick 12th last year originally, and I can see them maybe dropping 2 spots and being 10th again, potentially, just with teams that finish behind them that I think are gonna do better, the Devils being one of those
Yep.
teams. But beyond that, maybe, if goaltending really is that big of a problem, it will create a situation where it might naturally make them a team with a higher draft pick finishing lower in the standings, or it could be what makes them a playoff team. It really could go either way. They got really good goaltending for the first half of the season last year, and that's what put them in the position to begin with. So, kind of depends on what kind of starts you get from day one. And I think in the early going too, what kind of starts you get, because these games tend to be kind of unhinged. We've seen a few of them already around the league where the scores are high and
Yeah, hat
defense is
tricks.
low. So, and it doesn't help matters that I'm referring to that, and one of the games that was like that featured the first 2 opponents the Flyers have on the season,
Yep.
where scoring is high. So we'll see, but it's certainly one of my keys to the season is whether or not goaltending is successful. And I guess to kind of start to close this episode out, I wanted to get your player to watch this season, and you may have already answered it. I don't know. We'll see. I want to get your answer though, and it could kind of, to me, it kind of goes different ways. Like I wrote down 3 different categories that it could be, and whether it's a guy who you think is going to break out this season, whether it's the guy you think is going to be the MVP of the team, just somebody who's a difference maker on the team. Who's your player that you're excited to see that you think is going to have the big year?
First name that came to my mind is gonna blow your mind, Bobby Brink. I think
Okay, I was
that
not expecting that.
I know, I wasn't expecting it either, but I think what I saw from him at camp and preseason, he has been exceeding my expectations, and I always root for Bobby Brink. I know that he's one of Tortorella's, favorites in a way, but I do feel like Bobby Brink is gonna put up a lot of goals this season, and he's gonna be a playmaker. You always kind of wanna root for the underdog, and that's what Bobby Brink is to me. So, I feel like watching Bobby will be good. However, I'm a little biased, and I'm always gonna say Travis Konechny because he is the best player on the team, at least in my opinion. And the obvious answer will be Michkov as another player for the top 3.
Yeah, so I think I tried to set you up for that a little bit with Mishkov because I figured that was where you were gonna go potentially. And then I thought when you were talking about Tyson Forster, you were gonna go there, so it could have gone either way.
Yeah.
I definitely, I mean, Bobby Brink is definitely a potential candidate for, like, if he has a really good year, that would define breakout season for sure. And I think like kind of you answered each stage of the question then. Konechny is probably your MVP of the team in terms of what he brings from a leadership quality and being a talented player. And Mishkov could be a difference maker. So I view Mishkov in a similar way. He's one of the 3 players I kind of start with all the time. And then I tend to shift to Ivan Fedotov as another one. So we've already talked about those 2. So the player for me that I'm most interested in seeing is Jamie Drysdale. I think he's the one of the catalysts of whether this is a very successful season or not.
Wow.
He's definitely a candidate for breakout player, because if he can put together way more offensive production in line with what his skill set appears to be, especially since he looks healthy, that could go a long way. And I think, like, to me, one of the storylines of the season, and this is, I have this as in an article that's going to come out on the day the season opens, is his health. That's got to be one of the storylines. If you're going to look at the rookies and goaltending as other storylines, that's the other storyline, is how healthy can Jamie Drysdale be? Because I think that at this point, like you talked about top 10 picks and high picks and turning something in them. I found something interesting the other day when the league sends out kind of their release on the opening rosters, and the Flyers have more first round draft picks on the roster than any other team in the league. And it's not even close. They have 15, and the next highest teams, and there's a few tied, but the next highest is 11. And yes, that spans a wide gap. Like, for example, a former first round pick is Eric
Eric
Johnson, who was
Johnson with
first.
the Blues.
Yeah. So who is a first overall pick, no less, and is not expected to play like one on this version of this team. This version of Eric Johnson is not the version that went first overall, and he knows that as well. It's not meant to be that way. But I think about a lot of the other guys that are. Owen Tippett was a 10th overall pick. Travis Konechny being a later first round pick that has amounted to all-star capabilities. Morgan Frost is in a critical year. Joel Farabee's in a critical year. Tyson Forster's in a potential breakout situation. But Jamie Drysdale qualifies a little differently to me because he was a 6th overall pick.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of one of those players that qualifies as a guy you pick that high needs to really have high rewards. And I hope that now that he's fully healthy, he can kind of realize that, because I think it's always in his head that he's got the capability, but also in his head that I just can't stay healthy. If I was healthy, maybe I could make something happen. And I feel like he's got a different outlook on things right now because he spent the entire summer in the area and was able to rehab and was able to get himself ready, put on some extra weight too. I think that helps. He was definitely one of the guys that I looked at last season late and thought, if you have one thing to do this offseason, it's put on some weight. He did. So I hope that all of that has an impact. And to me, he's one of the critical players to everything going successfully. If he's healthy, he helps. Obviously, he helps the power play. He helps from an offensive standpoint. He can move the puck well. And I think you just want him out there to realize his role, because if he gets to that next level, I think a lot of people are going to feel a little differently about that trade by the end of next season if it works out this way than if, the way that people were feeling in April when he barely got to play at the end of the season and another injury crept up, and it was for a top prospect going the other way too. So hopefully that balances out this time. And to me, he's the guy I'm keeping an eye on.
Yeah, no, and I like what you had to say. I think Drysdale's an interesting one. I mean, his skating is strong and he will make an impact on defense. Um, you know, thinking about the defense, I also think Nick Sealer is another player that just adds so much to the game. He had that extension. So, but Eric Johnson, too, I do have to say, despite his age, and I'm not calling somebody in their 30s old in any means, but in hockey, I'm old considered in hockey, okay? If I was a rookie in hockey, people would make a joke out of me. However, I do think that Eric Johnson does have a big body and he will be effective on the ice. But I think the defense is going to significantly improve with a Jamie Drysdale that's actually healthy. So I'm glad that you pointed that one out.
Yeah. So it's going to do it for the first episode of Flyers Files on 97.3 ESPN. And get ready, because the season is underway Friday night, 10 o'clock against the Vancouver Canucks. You can follow along in-game coverage. Both of us will have different thoughts throughout the game. You can follow me on Twitter X at Kevin_Durso. Follow Haley at Haley T. Simon on Twitter X as well. Stay tuned to the 97.3 Instagram page as well. You'll see, as once again, my reels coming back as pre and post game analysis. And we got a little bit of a ways to go before we get to talk about home game coverage and live coverage from Wells Fargo Center. But there's going to be plenty to kind of get you set up for that. Couple of games this weekend, some more next week on the road trip, and a lot to go over. And like we said, a clean slate to start the 2024-25 Flyer season. So thanks for listening. This has been the Flyers Files podcast right here on 97.3 ESPN.